In the Americas, which country has the largest percentage of Muslims?
Canada.
Yeah, they were greener in South America.
It's Guinea, isn't it? One of the Guineas?
Yeah, exactly. And that's where you get to Suriname, Guyana, French Guyana. Here, it's about 5%, but Suriname, and this is where I don't know much about these communities at all, but there are mosques, there are Muslim organizations, and I mean, they're small countries, so we're talking about a few 100,000 Muslims, maybe 500,000, I think, all together. And then Canada has about 3.5 to 4% Muslim, obviously concentrated in the major cities, in Toronto and Vancouver in particular. Really, Toronto. I mean, there are parts of Toronto that you just find halal restaurants, left and right, and it's like there are parts of London where it's just like it's all Muslim, and you actually need to be able to speak Urdu in these. They're not no-go zones, all right. But didn't you hear that on Fox News that there were Muslim no-go zones?
Yes,
in the
US.
They're not no-go zones. Yeah. But it is. But then the Canada, you have a lot of Ismaili Muslims. These communities that we spoke about before that moved from South Asia and then into Kenya was one of the countries where there were many, and then went into Kenya, and then went into and then went up to Canada. You have a lot of these people, so you have a lot of Muslims who will actually say, "Yeah, I'm from South Asia, but I was born in Kenya." How did that happen? This is one of these weird accidents of history. Yes.
Where are these numbers coming from?
These numbers, you get them from all over the place. And so when I'm collecting these numbers, for example, I'm trying to get what you're looking at different surveys. So sometimes the Pew surveys are the best. And sometimes, like, for example, I'm not giving you the numbers on Mexico, Cuba, Argentina, and stuff because I can't find reliable numbers. I don't know. I don't know that one. Oh, yeah.
That's a good source.
Oh, that's yeah. The Pew has excellent research, and Pew actually has some online resources where you can actually drag over, and it'll kind of expand, and it'll show you the layout in certain places. So, and very good articles. So that's one of the very good sources. Some people think that Pew undercounts the numbers. Like, let's say, for example, when you go to Turkey, there will be people, if you find something that is a source that is influenced by the Alevis, they'll tell you that there are 20 to 25 million Alevis in Turkey. And other people will come down with, and if you get some very kind of staunch Sunni sources, they might tell you, well, there's only 5 to 8 million. So you can get very wide disparities in some of these numbers. And let's say when you get to the United States, do we count the Nation of Islam? All of a sudden, you count the Nation of Islam, you've got a lot more people in there. And so these, and then, Canada, for example, you might have somebody that would count it, a Sunni Muslim who wouldn't count the Ismailis. Usually, when any Muslim wants to count them in a non-Muslim country, they're going to include everybody because they want to claim a higher percentage. And even though theologically they might say, well, I don't accept these people as part of Islam. So I personally got these, like this number is actually from the Canadian government. This number is is kind of a combination between Pew and a survey that was done by CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations. That CARE put it close to 7 million, Pew put it at about 3.3 million. I think probably 5 million might be a good number. Yes.
Yeah, this is not going to be a tricky question, but how are individuals of mixed descent count? Is it about whether they're practicing or not? I mean, especially when you get into, there's religion, but then there's ethnicity. How do you count that?
Yeah, this is a very important question. So let's say, for example, you'll have a lot of people who are Iranian. That for them, they're not practicing. A lot of Iranians in the United States, they're not practicing. And there are a lot of Iranians you'll find who not practicing Islam is considered a point, because for them they feel like if they practice Islam, they'll be supporting the regime. because they were kicked out for religious reasons, or they felt like they had to flee for religious reasons. There are other Iranians who completely reject the regime who are extremely pious. But there are a lot of Iranians who we people in counting them, and this is where the numbers get so different sometimes, especially between CARE and Pew, who for purposes of counting them, CARE and other Muslims are going to count them as Muslim, but they themselves say, yeah, I was born Muslim, but I'm not, I'm not practicing that, and all these things happen, and I never will. So it varies. And this again gets into when we say, and Professor Blankenship was talking about this the other day, when you could go in and you'll find people in Senegal who would say are Muslim, but what were they practicing? They're not, and we would say that they're Sunni Muslim. I would say Sunni Islam has been here from this time forward, but a lot of people who we are classifying as Sunni Muslim, they weren't practicing anything that a Sunni Muslim from Egypt would say was Islam. In the United States, it also gets very complicated because you have some of these, like I had a colleague whose name was Alia Abdurrahman at Brandeis University. And Alia is from an American Muslim family, from the black Muslims who had broken off from the Nation of Islam, considered themselves Muslim, but didn't practice. And you would actually, like, I had another friend of my daughter's. There was, I won't use the name because I don't want to embarrass the family, but they consider themselves Muslim, but they'll have pictures, they don't practice, and they'll have pictures on Facebook of being at a bar. Like, we had a great family vacation. They don't pray, they consider themselves Muslims. They don't fast, they consider themselves Muslims. And so it varies quite widely. And why are we counting a particular person? Let's say in the UAE, I have a lot of my students who don't pray. They're Muslims. They don't pray. And so some people say, okay, well, they're just bad Muslims, non-observant Muslims.
But I think also, not just that, but also then the ethnically, racially mixed families.
Yeah.
Where we try to impose a background on them that's.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that happens as well, and that's happening more and more in America. But there are a lot of Muslims who will come over and they want to stay kind of as their ethnic community. This is actually a major issue that we're going to talk about a little bit when we talk about Islam in America tomorrow morning. But yeah, no, it gets very tricky sometimes as to who you're going to count. I mean, so we said that Turkey is 97% Muslim, right? Well, there are some staunchly secular Turks that we're going to count as Muslim. We're basically using Islam here as an ethnic category. We want to classify the world according to religion, almost using it like an ethnic category. For purposes of that classification, these people are Muslim. If you were to break it down into secular with a Muslim background versus Muslim, then you would have much different numbers of who is actually Muslim in Turkey.
Like Judaism.
Yeah, yeah. So it gets it's very sticky sometimes when you're talking about the numbers, and even when it gets down to practice, even a lot of people who do identify as Muslim, like say for example, a lot of Iranians who identify as Muslim, who are, and I've found this phenomena in Iran itself, where they identify as Muslim, but for them, Islam is not praying 5 times a day. Islam is the poetry of Rumi. And they'll know the poetry of Rumi, and they'll recite the poetry of Rumi, and they might pray occasionally, but they really don't associate being Muslim with actually observing those practices that the scholars would call Islam. One of the things you have to take into account here is when the West goes out and the West encountered Islam, they went to the scholars. The anthropological study of Islam, sociological studies of Islam come up later. First thing you do is you go to the scholars and say, okay, what is this? Explain it to us. And so a lot of the ways, and this actually happened in a lot of scholarship on Islam up until actually quite recently, it was very, very Sunni biased. that Islam was identified in terms of Sunni understandings of Islam. There's been a great wave of Shiite studies that has come up in the past 20 to 25 years that has served as a corrective to that in a lot of ways. But even within Sunni Muslims, when we go in and we identify people in Southeast Asia, in Indonesia, as Muslim, well, a lot of their practices of a more, shall we say, orthodox form, and I really don't like the word, but always put the word in orthodox in quotation marks when you use it as regards Islam, because orthodox really is a Christian word that implies that there is a central body that gets to determine, there is kind of an official body who gets to determine what is right theology, whereas in Islam it's always resisted there being this particular official body, especially in Sunni Islam. So it doesn't apply completely and transfer over. Nonetheless, so we're going to say that these people are practicing Islam in an orthodox, historically orthodox way and have a historically orthodox theology. All right? But that's more recent than when Islam actually spread there. Some people said, oh yeah, okay, we're Muslims. And they adopted Islam. But the real kind of deep practice or extensive practice of praying 5 times a day and fasting Ramadan and paying zakat, that all came generations later than they actually became Muslim. There are many people now who say that they're Sunni Muslims who aren't doing anything that we would identify with Sunni Islam. They drink. They go out. They might say a prayer here and there. They might go to the mosque occasionally during Ramadan. They might go to the Friday sermon sometimes. But like, for example, in the United States of America, the vast majority of Muslims don't attend the mosque. Right? Just like the vast majority of Muslims don't attend, Christians don't attend church in many areas. So it's very fluid. You know, it's very difficult to put that down, and it's a very good point. And this is where, again, some of the numbers, especially when you're talking here and here, where some of the numbers can be very, very different. We're going to count everybody who ethnically came from a region that we identify as Muslim, even if they're not practicing, even if their parents didn't practice, even if they don't know anything about the Quran. We're going to identify them as Muslim. I mean, and it's justifiable. Like a lot of the Indian tribes here, when they started learning that there were also these Jews among the white people, they were like, "What? Why didn't you tell us that? We thought you were all Christians." I had one friend who was actually living out here in New Mexico who was working with the Navajo. Who said that some of her, the Navajo teachers that she was working with, when they started explaining about Judaism, like there was this other person and they were talking to the person as if the person was a Christian, and they're like, "Oh no, he's Jewish." They were just like, "What?" And then they tried to explain it to them, and they almost felt betrayed. They're like, "Why didn't you tell us that there were also these Jewish people among you?" And so sometimes, it comes like that in the same way when we're classifying some of these groups, and it's a very important thing to keep in mind.